Hello, I'm Mark Payne. Welcome to History Alive. History Alive is a program of the West Virginia Humanities Council that brings historical figures to life through portrayals by presenters who have conducted thorough research into their character. These presentations are both entertaining and educational. The Humanities Council makes these characters available to nonprofit organizations across West Virginia, such as schools, libraries, historical societies, and a wide range of civic groups. The presentation fee is paid by the Council, and we ask only that their travel costs be covered by the host group. History Live is designed as an interactive experience between the character and the audience. We encourage your organization or school to host a presentation and bring a figure from history for a visit with your audience or students. Having someone like Booker T. Washington or Ann Bailey come to speak to your group can breathe life into these historical figures and make them seem much more real. But nothing compares to the live in-person visit. Each presentation consists of 3 parts: a monologue, a question-answer session with the character, and then the presenter breaks character to answer questions about he or she conducted their research. The 15 presenters on our History Live roster have researched a variety of sources, such as diaries, journals, letters, official documents, autobiographies, and the research of other scholars in developing their character. A History Live presentation is not a play. It is very much an audience participation event that relies on interaction between the audience and the character. Being able to ask your own questions of these important figures from the past is a unique experience. It's difficult to reproduce the feel of an actual History Live presentation here in the studio. Without an audience to ask questions, we'll change the format just a little bit and have our guests sit with me for a few questions after the monologue. But we do hope to give a sample of how a History Live presentation can add to the offerings at your school or organization. There will be information on the screen at the end of this program for how to contact the Humanities Council about bringing a History Live character to your community. At this time, I would like to welcome today's guest from history. We are pleased to have with us in the studio the great Cherokee leader, Ostenaco.
My English brothers and sisters, I'm glad to see you. I can tell that most of you are Virginians from the back settlements west of the Blue Ridge. Perhaps I am the first to bring you the good news. Our enemy is beaten. The French have all but abandoned Fort Duquesne. Our warriors have rid the woods of enemy engines, so the army of General Forbes now plans its march to the forks of Ohio River. To those of you who lost family and property to the enemy, I offer my heartfelt sorrow. Brothers and sisters, take heart in the news that you may soon return to your plantations and work your fields in safety. I have a pass. I'm returning from fighting with Major Lewis and Colonel Washington against the Frenchmen at Fort Duquesne. Here it is. My name is written hereupon in the English writing, which I do not read. I am called by my Cherokee brethren, Askatihi Ostenaco. The horse and other presents listed on the pass are for my wife and children, and the horse is back in the camp with the rest of the warriors in my party. I had hoped to shoot a turkey or a deer for our supper this evening, but talking with my English brothers and sisters is a pleasure I will not forego. When I was a boy, my mother taught me many important things I've not forgotten. She advised me to always listen to Wah-Ya, our clan leader. She told me, Wah-Ya, Wolf, will always guide me, even when our chosen leaders fail to do so. For two-legged people may falter and become confused, but Wah-Ya is our elder brother, and he sits in the council of all the first beings. I've always listened to him whenever he's come to me to help me. For many years, your governors asked us to make peace with the Six Nations and other northern Indians, and this we have attended to with some success. But the French have lured away many, Ani Sawanugi, the Shawanoes. They have lured them away from the English king. So, when your governor Dinwiddie asked us to consider taking up the tomahawk against our traditional enemies, I was glad to speak on behalf of the call to arms in our councils. You see, when I first heard the words of Governor Dinwiddie, I had a strong dream. I had this dream several nights. Wolf came to me and encouraged me to be brave and resolute in fighting the enemy. He warned me of the trickery of the French and their allies. He told me the war would not be easily won, but if we would stand fast with our English king, we would gain a decisive victory, and we would be blessed for many years. At Ichalti, our nation's principal town, as well as at Guahiyi, the head town of the Lower Chalagi, councils were held for several days. I spoke on behalf of fighting the Anis Sawanugi. We have fought the Shawano since a time before I was born. Since the last war, their warriors had taken many captives, so the grief of our mothers and grandmothers had not been fully comforted. Many days of deliberation were necessary to give our principal women, our mothers and our grandmothers, time to decide our nation's role in the war. I was glad to answer the call to arms, for I fully understand the treachery of the French foxes. They intend only to conquer us and to pay us low prices for our deerskins. In the memory of my people, the English goods have always been of better quality, and the prices our deerskins have brought have always been better with you than with the French. The English kings have given us many good presents. So, when most of the councils decided for war, I proposed a bold stroke against the Shawano. In the winter that followed the defeat of the English army near the French fort at the forks of Ohio River, Fort Duquesne, our large force would move swiftly down Sandy Creek on foot and by canoe. We would attack the Shawano towns on Ohio and Sonioto rivers. We knew many of their warriors were with the French in their forts at Duquesne, in the Illinois country, and at the Alabama's fort, and we knew this would weaken the defenses at Sonioto. We sent wampum belts to our middle towns and our lower towns, and I recruited 130 warriors. We intended for the Shawano towns. Your governor, Dinwiddie, he ordered Major Lewis to command an army to join us in our campaign. And so, 3 winters ago, in 1756, the two armies gathered at Fort Frederick on the Dunkart's bottom of New River. Although there were several veterans of the previous war in my army, several of our young warriors had not fought alongside Englishmen before. This led to some misunderstandings later, but in the first days of the campaign, we enjoyed the company of your soldiers. I found Major Lewis to be an able commander. He always listened to our advice whenever we held a council of war. At Fort Frederick, we danced a war dance, we sang our war songs, and a few Virginians joined in to sing of their deeds of valor in the last war. That is the war in which I earned my rank of Anskatihi, man-killer. It is the second highest rank we warriors can attain. The first is Skayagunsta, great warrior. Augustota is one of the few men who has earned that rank in my generation. I do aspire to it, and with the help of Wolf and the great being above, I may yet attain that rank in this present war. Although I am healthy, I am no longer a young warrior. Nearly 60 winters have passed since my mother gave birth to me. My mother, she is my inspiration, for despite her advanced age, she can still carry a bundle of 20 deer hides 3 leagues in a day, and at the end of that day, she will kindle a fire and cook a good soup for her son, her favorite son. I will always protect her, and all our women and children, as long as I draw breath. After we danced and sang at New River, the two armies were fully gathered, and we moved out, 340 strong, westward, with some Chalagi and some Virginians serving as scouts out ahead of the main force. We crossed the mountains to Holston and Clinch rivers, and then we dropped off the Stony Ridge onto Sandy Creek. That windy moon was an unusually wet moon, and we had to cross streams swollen by winter rains 20 times on the first day going down Sandy Creek, 46 times on the second day as I recollect, and numerous times on other days thereafter as the main creek grew larger. When we came to the great cane brake, the horses fed well, but we did not stay long enough for them to satisfy their hunger. We followed the main road through the low gap westward of the cane brake, and we came to a branch of Sandy Creek. There, our scouts found a bear hunting camp of the enemy. The hunters we tracked had been killing bears to render fat. The land along Sandy Creek is full of bears. There are so many bears there that people of several nations conduct our winter hunts there. Most of the deer were killed out 20 years ago for the skin trade, but plenty of turkeys, elks, buffaloes, and bears remain. We Chalagi and the Delawars, the Shawanos, Miamis, Wendats, we often cross paths while hunting sleeping bears in that region. We found many other signs of the enemy on that branch we followed to war, especially many horse tracks and fresh moccasin prints. The Virginia soldiers began calling that branch War Creek because of the many warrior signs found there. When we came to the forks of Sandy Creek, we Chalagi commenced building canoes out of the bark of the great elm trees that grow there. You see, the journey from our towns on Tennessee River to Ohio River by way of Sandy Creek is usually reckoned at only 5 days' travel, 3 overland and 2 by canoe. Had we not had the assistance of the Virginia Army, we could have easily been to the Shawanoe towns with our 130 men in the time it took our combined force to reach the Sandy Creek Forks. Major Lewis, he followed our lead and set his men to work building canoes. But the water was too high for boats filled with supplies. Major Lewis's canoes capsized. Much of the remaining ammunition and food were lost. The horses still carried food, those who were yet alive, for some had starved to death. But the way was rough, and the pack train was required to climb steep mountains numerous times. Many of the soldiers stood against the orders of their officers to proceed, and a number of companies left the army altogether to go home. Finally, Major Lewis asked if I would return to Williamsburg with him to discuss the war effort with the head men of Virginia. I agreed to do so, and a party of 50 warriors agreed to accompany us. Those of us who returned with Major Lewis, we fared well, for we ate the remaining horses, and we killed a number of bears along the way. Later, in Williamsburg, I heard of the companies who returned against orders. They did not fare so well. They returned by way of the North Fork of Sandy Creek, where they were forced to boil their rawhide tugs to make soup to drink, just to stay alive. You can see what poor nourishment such would provide hungry men. Many of those soldiers still refer to that fork of Sandy Creek as the Tug Fork. When Governor Dinwiddie ordered Major Lewis to come build a fort amongst us, my party escorted the Virginia soldiers to Ichalte. There, our headman, Kanehuati, whom you may know as Old Hop, he and the Tugokala, the little carpenter, asked if we had been poorly treated by the Virginians, as had some of our brother warriors. I told them we'd never been so well used in any parts as we had been in Virginia. Not only the governor and the great men made us presents, but the people in general was kind and showed us respect. I told the rest of the people gathered there at Ichalte, I could spend my blood for my brothers, the Virginians, and I am sure if you were all as well acquainted with my brothers, you would spend your blood for them too. After the fort was constructed, Major Lewis left Captains Paris and McNeil with me in Tumultly. Captain McNeil asked my wife for some butter she had made from our milch cows in the summer. She gave it to him, and he told her it was for some special treat. Later that night, Captain McNeil and the other Englishmen amongst us gathered to remember the birth of your God, Christ Jesus, by reading from his sacred book. My family and others were invited to attend the celebration, and we did so. After the Englishmen sang a song, we all shared a drink of rum, only slightly watered and heated enough to melt the butter. They told us it was your traditional drink to share with loved ones on Christ's Mass. I asked Captain McNeil if he would write a letter for me to Major Lewis. He agreed to do so. After he warmed his ink by the fire, I began to tell him what to write. I call on the great being above to judge if I've not thought of you always. You, Major Lewis, and myself have always thought alike. Take my advice. Stick to warlike men, and let the children in Virginia grow up to be men before they are killed by their enemies. I recruited in many of our towns that winter, and my effort bore fruit for the war. Hundreds of warriors responded to the call. We assisted in the war season last year as well as this one. In the spring of this year, over 500 warriors went to Potomac River. Nearly 200 went to Roanoke and James Rivers. Hundreds of other Chalegee went down Tennessee River to the Ohio to battle the Frenchmen in the Illinois country, as well as at the Alabama's fort. Augunstota led our forces to the Illinois, and I led our forces against Fort Duquesne. Our raids upon the enemy near the fort and westward of Logstown have struck fear into the hearts of the French engines. We've captured many French soldiers and several officers. 3 moons ago, we found the garrison at Fort Duquesne to be much reduced, and only women, children, and old people west of Ohio River. This made us realize perhaps you, our English brethren, are in much less danger, but our own people may be in greater danger. This is why I'm going home now, to defend my family and our towns against the enemy. If the great being above favors me, I intend to visit King George. Tell him what an honor it has been to serve him in this war and the last. I want to thank him for his kindness towards us over the years. Without the trade he encourages between his white children and us, we would be a poor people. The great king will be glad to hear me testify to the brightness of the ancient covenant chain that links us two peoples together. I know I'm old, and the passage to England is dangerous, but I hope to do this thing before I die. We Cherokee and you Virginians, we hold on to the ends of that covenant chain that binds us together in love and respect. And with the defeat of our mutual enemies, it appears we now stand at the door of the council house, wherein we will strengthen this long-standing friendship, perhaps make new treaties to benefit both our peoples. Is there anything you would ask of me to help you understand your Cherokee brethren better, so that we may be one under protection of our great king? Perhaps you're eager to hear more news of your plantations on the back parts of Virginia. I'm very familiar with the land between the Blue Ridge and Ohio River, for it has sustained my people for countless generations. Do you have any questions for me?
We're here with Cherokee leader Ostenaco. I want to welcome you to the program today and thank you for taking time to be with us today.
Thank you, brother.
In your talk, you had mentioned your involvement with the your Virginia brothers and sisters and the Virginia Regiment. I know in the Virginia Regiment there are different military rankings, colonels, majors, sergeants, privates, and a few other ranks. What sort of ranks do you Cherokees have other than Great Warrior and Man Killer, which you have the ranking of Man Killer, is that correct?
That's correct. When any Cherokee warrior first goes to war and is given a gun, his title is gunman. The next highest rank is slave catcher, probably from the era when my people caught many slaves for the English along the eastern shores of the Atlantic. Then the next highest rank is Colonu, or Raven, and there are several people who have that rank now amongst us. Salanuki is one of them, personal friend of mine. And then is my rank, Askatahi, Man Killer, and then of course Skayakunsta, Great Warrior. Incidentally, one of your Virginia soldiers, one of your Virginia men, has been affectionately called by those of us who know him Skayagunsta Harmon, Heinrich Harmon. I understand the English pronounce it differently, like Skygusty or something to that effect. Those are the ranks that we have.
You mentioned that the principal women of your people really sort of garner some pretty major influence on your decisions about war and other things. How has that always been that way? How did that come?
In my memory, it has always been that way, and indeed, it seems to be changing now. When I was a young man, the principal women, the head women, the respected women, were expected to have a great deal of influence in deciding whether our nation went to war or not. Now, they do not make decisions on a daily basis once we have gone to war against another nation, but they had great influence in our councils for deciding whether or not we went to war. And it surprises me that the English have come to be so great a people without having that type of influence. The women, because of their gift of nurturing given to them by the great being above, they have much to say that could benefit you English and the French as well. So I would hope that perhaps your culture would begin to esteem them a little more than you do.
I think we'd be ahead of the game if we did.
I think so.
You're by the numbers you've mentioned. It seems like there's probably, I'm guessing, upwards of 1,000 Cherokee warriors that were fighting with the British against the French. And were you paid for this service?
It's a sensitive issue, brother, and I want to thank my English brethren for giving us the gifts that we have received. We've received many horses and rifles and cloth, especially calico, the cotton cloth that our women love to use. But we did have troubles at first. In the first year, we received almost nothing, and in 1757, there were some troubles getting those gifts for payment. Remember that these gifts are the only thing we get for our services. And our services have, if you ask Colonel Washington, he will tell you that our services were much needed and that the war could not have been won without our services.
I hear that Major Lewis thinks that the little carpenter is sort of wavering between the French and the English as far as his loyalty. Do you think that Major Lewis is correct?
Major Lewis is an intelligent man, but Major Lewis does not understand all aspects of Cherokee culture, and especially diplomacy. And Akko, the little carpenter, is our most respected diplomat, and his entertaining of French emissaries during the beginning of this late war, in my opinion, was necessary to protect us, especially from the Western and Northern Indians that are allies of the French. Essentially, he was staying the hand of a French military involvement early on in the war until we could gauge how best we could protect ourselves and assist our English brothers at the same time. So no, I would not say that Akko is wavering at all. I think Major Lewis is mistaken, but he is far removed from what goes on in Ichalti.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned that the land between the Blue Ridge and the Ohio River has sustained your people for countless generations. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that has?
Yes, and I say countless because I have no, even in my earliest memory, I was made aware of the land north of Tennessee River as being a place that we could hunt. And primarily it has sustained us through our hunting efforts there. As I mentioned, along Sandy Creek, there are many bears along Sandy Creek. South of Moniton-Gachuyeti River, the Kanawha River, are many bears. And it is very important for us to have bear fat to help us survive through the winter. Mm-hmm. We eat a lot of bear fat. We cover our bodies with bear fat. And so we need to have a place where there are lots of bears to hunt. And that is one way that the region has sustained us. And of course, we have traveled to and from through that region to war against traditional enemies in the past, including the Six Nations. And even though we are at peace at the moment with the Six Nations, in the past we have had several wars with the Six Nations. And that land has been our transport to and from those wars.
Yeah. At this time, I'd like to introduce to you the presenter of Ostenaco, who is in reality Mr. Doug Wood of Nitro, West Virginia. Doug, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Doug is a new member of our History Live roster of historical figures. And in real life, Doug is an environmental resources specialist for the Division of Water Resources for the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection. So,
you said that well.
Thank you. So I'm going to start in asking you, as Doug Wood, the researcher of this character, is what I always ask everybody is, what were your sources? How do you go about finding information about someone like a Native American from the 1700s?
It's a little tough because Ostenaco did not have any written form of communication. He could not write English. Indeed, even though I spoke English as Ostenaco, he spoke very little English. So there's not a lot on record that we can attribute as his words. However, there are certain letters I mentioned in my comment or in my monologue that Captain Paris and Captain McNeil were with him one winter, and Captain McNeil wrote a letter. He did write a letter on Christmas Eve to Major Lewis, and apparently in it he was writing specifically on behalf of Ostenaco. So we have letters like that that have been recorded in collections. The Washington papers, the University of Virginia has some of those, and some of those are actually being made available online. I think the attempt is to get all of the Washington writings and all of the Washington papers, including letters that he has received that are still in collections around the United States online. I don't know how long it will be, but those kinds of letters are also found in archives. For instance, in South Carolina, there are archives. In Virginia, there are archives, archived materials, letters written during the French and Indian War. And some of those are available through publications. Our own archives library has been really helpful. Cultural Archives Library has been helpful in providing me with books that have transcribed letters from the period that mention Ostenaco. There aren't many, but there are some. So there's not a wealth of information, but there's a good deal out there. And one person in particular, Henry Timberlake, who knew Ostenaco and met him in 1760 or 62. He was a young man in the Virginia Regiment, and anyway, he went to England with Ostenaco, and then he wrote a book about it later. And so we have a good deal of information about Ostenaco and the Cherokee people during that period, because Timberlake spent some time amongst them. Also, maybe this isn't commonly known, but Timberlake fathered a child through Ostenaco's daughter, and that started the Timberlake line amongst Cherokees, and there are Cherokees today with the last name of Timberlake because of that conjunction there between two cultures.
So can you give us an idea of what areas of current-day West Virginia did Ostenaco travel through, they had influence in, or campaigned in?
Yeah, in the winter of 1756, he was in McDowell County, West Virginia, on the Sandy Creek expedition. And Sandy Creek at that time was the body of water that we would identify as Dry Fork, flowing down to its junction with modern-day Tug Fork, and then from there to its junction with Leviza Fork. It becomes Big Sandy River downstream of Leviza Fork's conjunction with Tug Fork. That body of water was called Sandy Creek in those days. And the North Fork of Sandy Creek that I alluded to in my monologue was called the Tug Fork precisely for that reason that I gave, that some of the men returning against orders returned that way, which was less known than the way that they had come down onto Sandy Creek. And they did get hungry. They did boil their rawhide tugs to make soup just to try to stay alive. And that's how that stream got its name, Tug Fork. Now today we apply the name Tug Fork even downstream beyond the junction with Dry Fork, all the way to Leviza Fork. But that's just southern West Virginia. He also was in the eastern Panhandle region of West Virginia. He operated out of Cumberland Fort in Maryland, which is just across the river from Fort Ashby, West Virginia. And he also operated at Pearsall's Fort at Romney, and some other forts in there.
So he was spread pretty wide across what is now West Virginia.
Yeah, in 57 and 58, he was in the eastern Panhandle.
Doug, here in the last minute, I just want to very quickly ask you about, I know you're involved in the Mary Ingalls Trail Association and their event. Could you tell us just a little bit about that here in the last 30 seconds?
Sure. That event highlights Mary Ingalls and her family's ties to the Kanawha Valley, as well as Kanawha Valley history involving other people. And it's primarily 18th century, and it happens every last full weekend of September. The last full weekend of September. And it's near Winfield, West Virginia in Putnam County. And it's a living history encampment as well as a living history trail.
And that's on Route 35, is it not?
Yeah, it's just as off of Route 35.
Okay.
That's right.
Doug, I want to thank you again for being
you.
here, Mr. Doug Wood. And thank you for joining us here for History Alive.